This House is now in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Tuesday, October 13th, 2020 to be confirmed. Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed.
Announcements by Your Honor the Speaker.
The proclamation from Her Excellency, the Governor General.
And, yeah. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General.
Proclamation from Her Excellency, the Governor General. SI 2020. By Her Excellency Dame Sandra Prunella Mason, Dame Grand Cross of the Most Distinguished Order of St. Michael and St. George, Dame of St. Andrew, Queen's Counsel, Governor General of Barbados. Whereas it is provided by Section 60, subsection 1 of the Constitution, that each session of Parliament shall be held at such place and commence at such time as the Governor General may appoint. And whereas by proclamation dated the 7th day of September 2020, the Governor General appointed the Lord Erskine Sandiford Centre, 2 Mile Hill, St. Michael, as the place at which the second session of Parliament shall be held at 10 hours in the morning, and the Worthing Corporate Centre, Worthing, Christchurch, as the place where the second session of Parliament should continue with effect from the 22nd day of September 2020. And whereas by proclamation given by the Governor General on the 28th day of September 2020, a state of public health emergency exists in Barbados, by reason of which it is impracticable for all of the members of the House of Assembly and the Senate to continue to meet physically at the Worthing Corporate Centre, Worthing, Christchurch. Now, therefore, by virtue and in exercise of the power and authority in me vested, I, Dame Sandra Prunella Mason, Dame Grand Cross of the Most Distinguished Order of St. Michael and St. George, Dame of St. Andrew, Queen's Counsel, Governor General of Barbados, do hereby declare that the second session of Parliament, which commenced on the 7th day of September 2020 and continued at the Worthing Corporate Centre, Worthing, Christchurch, with effect from the 22nd day of September 2020, shall, from the 27th day of October 2020, be held with some members present in the chambers and other members participating virtually for the purpose of complying with the protocol relating to physical distancing, commencing at 10 hours in the morning. Given under my hand and the public seal of Barbados, this 26th day of October 2020, and in the 69th year of Her Majesty's reign.
Sorry?
Visit thereafter at the adjournment.
At the adjournment. Sorry? Whatever it is. So I carry as point of privilege now? Point of privilege, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member Michael A.
Just to suggest that what was just brought before the attention of the House sounds a bit out of order and improper to me. Far be it from me to be critical of any action that's taken in the name of Her Excellency, but it would seem to me that if the Parliament of Barbados is shifting to a situation where there is participation of members virtually, even in the existent situation of the COVID protocols, that this Parliament should be giving attention to the regulations to govern the context in which members do actually participate by virtual means. Seems to me that this is out of order. Seems to me those regulations which would amend the standing orders should be brought here first. The Parliament should discuss and vote on them, and then later on, perhaps, a proclamation from Her Excellency.
Honorable Member St. Joseph.
I don't even know, Mr. Speaker, that this is the time to be discussing these matters, but in as much as you've given the liberty to the Leader of the Opposition to raise a point of privilege, I would think that what the Honourable Leader of the Opposition asserts ought to happen, is a bit in reverse, because under the legislation that governs Parliament, such matters are in the authority of the sovereign, of the Governor General. And just as it required Her Excellency's special permission to meet in this place, just as it required her special permission to have our state opening or opening after the prorogation of Parliament at Sherburne Conference Centre, any such arrangements as we may think to put in place also require her prior permission. That permission having now been given by her proclamation, it is for the Chamber now to restructure its standing orders in such a way as to facilitate or as to give life or animus to what has been proclaimed. I don't know if the Leader of the Opposition, I don't know how he feels about COVID, and I can't anticipate what is to happen, but there's a matter on the order paper today to deal with matters relating to COVID, and these matters are firmly set in the country's mind, and in the same way as other arrangements for other places are restricted, we have to consider the same thing here. Some of our members have comorbidities, so I don't know if my friend is objecting to Parliament going both virtual and physical. That is a practice that is now taken place in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So if the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is objecting to it, maybe he should just say that. But if he's not objecting to it because he is wise, and we know that he is, then the only issue is what are the rules that will govern the arrangement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. whether or not I would object to it would be dependent upon whether or not the matter is brought to the House. Has not, in my view, been brought to the House. What we have heard is a proclamation coming from Her Excellency, I would imagine under the advice of the government now in office, but not a word to us of any intention to change to virtual participation. No idea as to how that is going to function. Now, the Honorable Attorney General, who's a lawyer, of course, may very well be right and might very well be wrong. But I just want to place on record that I object strongly to what has happened here, because it seems to me to be improper, and that the House should be treated to the courtesy of a debate or discussion on the matter of virtual participation before we come to this stage.
Petitions, papers.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I'm commanded to lay the Caribbean International Airways Limited audited financial statements for the financial year ended March 31st, 2019, and the Caribbean Aircraft Handling Company Limited audited financial statements for the financial year ended March 31st, 2018.
Government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Pesticides Control Amendment Bill 2020.
Questions that the aforementioned bill be read a first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. Government business is now the order of the day. Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, before we commence proceedings, I beg to move that order number 2 be from the order paper be withdrawn formally. We would have actually debated the resolution on the last occasion when we met.
The question is that order number 2, as listed on the order paper, be withdrawn. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. Order number 2 is hereby withdrawn.
Order number 1, sir. In the name of the Honorable Minister of Housing, Lands and Maintenance, to move the passing of a resolution to approve, in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Investing and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the lease to the Memorial Holder Memorial Trust of certain parcels of land, property of the Crown, and more particularly described in the first schedule to this resolution, for the purpose of the construction of nursery schools.
Honorable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And it gives me great pride to be able to come to this honorable house this morning, to be able to put in place an opportunity for the Maria Holder Trust to lease 2 spots of land from the government of Barbados. The first one being that at Sayers Court, Christchurch, in the amount of 6,270 square meters, roughly 62,000 square feet. And the other one at Holders Hill, Durance, St. James, 5,785 square meters, which is roughly about 57,000 square feet. Both of these will be used to erect nurseries. And Speaker, you'd be aware that the Maria Holder Trust has done some excellent work for the government of Barbados, erecting nurseries in several locations. The first one was in Gall Hill, and then the other in Oldbury, both 2 excellent, well-designed nurseries. And I must say that whenever I pass by, especially the one at Oldbury, I'm always amazed at how well it has been kept, how well it's being maintained, what a wonderful and innovative structure the Maria Holder Trust was able to design and develop there for the people, and more importantly, for the children of Barbados. And clearly, you would agree with me, Mr. Speaker, that in order to have a good and successful life and opportunity to be able to contribute to the country of Barbados, all of our people need to have a well-grounded and a well-rounded foundation. And that foundation obviously starts from nursery and goes all the way up to tertiary education. So I'm extremely proud to be able to come to this Parliament and beg the approval of the Parliament to have the lease of these 2 spots of land. There's a third one that is under construction and it's almost finished now at Government Hill. So clearly the Maria Holder Trust has not only shown that they're able to put their design capability and also their impetus behind it, but they have a proven track record now with 3 nursery schools being built in Barbados and 2 more to be done very, very shortly. And let me say a few words about the Maria Holder Trust. Maria Holder Trust, as I understand it, and I had a significant amount of research done on it, have done tremendous work, not only in Barbados, but also in other of the Caribbean islands. You'd be familiar not only with the nurseries that they do here, but they also have supported the Barbados Cancer Society significantly. In fact, I was reading just the other day that, and if you permit me to pronounce her name, Miss Dorothy Cook Johnson, who was a former teacher of mine, actually. And she was remarking in their, I think, their 12th anniversary as a charity, that they had contributed and committed to the Barbados Cancer Society going back over 35, 40 years. So the Maria Holder Trust, even although it's only recognized as a charity over the last 12 years, that whole idea and concept of giving back to society, of giving back and giving to the country of which you are now a part of, is something that has been there with Maria Holder, and now, of course, her son, who is now the chairman of the Maria Holder Trust. But that whole concept and ethos of giving back to society is something that she passed on to her son, and is something that all of Barbados should look at and cherish. It is not everybody that is in an economic situation that they can give financially, but you can give of your time, you can give of your expertise, you can give of your labor. And come to think of it, when I see people who are giving just by painting a garbage can, beautifying an area, I think of a gentleman who works and who comes from the Christchurch East constituency, and he spends a lot of his time cleaning the beaches. You know, I wouldn't want to call his name, but I'm hearing an aside about a Mr. Cullimer. Things like that, giving back to society. There is nothing that can give more pride than that volunteerism, that opportunity to share some of what you have. And the Maria Holder Trust exemplifies to one of the highest levels what you can do. You have an idea, you have a wherewithal, and you're willing to share it with a community or share it with a country. And I really have to applaud all of the work that the Maria Holder Trust has been doing and look forward to working with them to do these other 2 nurseries. So this lease gives them the opportunity to access this land. And once they access the land, some water, please. Once they access the land, then they'll be able to build the nursery. Essentially, it will work in terms of a license. The term will be for 30 years. The rent for each site will be $200, a one-time payment. The premises are then being leased for the purposes of the construction of the nursery, together with the lands and all improvements shall then be handed over and licensed to the Crown. So once they build the nursery, the Crown will then operate it by the Education and Training Ministry as a nursery school. Their main concern, and I have to agree with them, is that once they build the nursery, that it is well maintained by the Crown. And this is important because too many of our buildings, after we build them, we do not maintain them appropriately. And I join with them in making that call for maintenance. Because even when you pass by and see these buildings and see the design of them, it is clear a lot of work went into the design. A lot of work went into providing it. Thank you very much. Thank you. A lot of work went into the design. A lot of work went into preparing it. And of course, these buildings cost thousands of dollars, maybe millions in some instances. So therefore, after going through and also looking at what wonderful work they have done, and I anticipate that they will very quickly, as they have done the first 3 nurseries, get these other 2 nurseries constructed at Sayers Court and at Holders Hill. And I would therefore ask that we agree that the Crown lease these 2 parcels of land to the Maria Holder Trust. I'm obliged.
Go ahead.
Beg to move this resolution do not pass.
I remember St. James South.
I want to thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity just to share for a couple of moments my sincerest gratitude to the Maria Holder Trust for the provision of a nursery at Holders Hill. It means a lot to the communities of St. James South. It means a lot to the communities of St. James Central. This exemplifies the type of partnership that needs to exist between government and the civil society. I think COVID has made us realize even more intensely that a community and a society cannot go forward except that there's partnership between all of the categories of persons and groupings which live in it: government, civil society, business. And this partnership is meaningful. I just want to share what this means for the people of St. James South, for the people of St. James Central. Insufficient nursery space has put tremendous pressure on families seeking to get clean, hygienic, conducive, attractive facilities for taking care of their children, that a mother has the confidence that when she leaves her infant, her child, in a public space for their care, that she is comfortable in her mind that that child will get the best care and will be in the best surroundings and be in a space that provides the necessary stimulation that infants will need. And so the provision of the nursery facilities at Holders Hill will do that for a number of mothers, a number of parents who live in the Durance Village area, Holders Hill, Kings Village, Grenham Road, Hoyts Village, Haynesville, and Thorpes. One of the struggles that we have had in that community, in those communities, has been the fact that the one available government nursery space is in such high demand that a number of children are really unable to be placed there. So many working parents have to struggle on mornings to take their children to other spaces, and very often it has to be in the private sector, which is a great burden to many families because they don't have the money to afford the private nursery care for their children. And certainly in this COVID environment, it has been made worse. So this could not come at a better time to assist families who need to have easily accessible and affordable nursery services within their community where the children can be safe. The other challenge with parents who work shift, parents who work very far, they need some place that is close enough that a relative can quickly go and collect the child if need be. Whereas when that child has to be placed elsewhere, far away from the family location, it presents a major challenge to that family. And many women have had to turn down work because the cost of nursery services versus what they're getting does not make sense for them. And therefore, they've had to opt not to accept jobs because there's no one to take care of the children, and the cost for taking care of that child is beyond their means. And it puts that family in a prison. It can't move forward. They can't get out from where they're at. So I really want to sincerely thank the Maria Holder Trust for the provision of these nursery services. I really, really look forward to its completion and its use by the people in the community. I want to express my thanks to my fellow minister for his diligence in bringing this to this Parliament, making this entirely possible, and I look forward to engaging as this is built, because the facility at Holders Hill is really quite large and has quite a lot of room at the back, and I also want to see if there's a possibility for other community engagement in the bigger space. So very happy, extremely delighted, and I want to express my thanks. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Christchurch, East Central, East.
Sir. The Honourable Member for East Central, sir, is considerably brighter. I understand he's taller, more handsome, and he can play a musical instrument, none of which I can actually do. But I can learn. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Maria Holder Trust because there are a couple of trusts in Barbados that we are aware of because of the volume of work that they do on a consistent basis. The establishment of this trust has served Barbados well over the last couple of years, sir, and as I understand it, there's an intention on the part of the trust to do more work, and it's totally and completely philanthropic. The work that's done by the Maria Holder Trust, sir, is aimed solely at benefiting Barbadians and making life better for a certain segment of Barbados. I also want to thank the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, sir, because he's approaching his mandate and his new ministry with the same vigor that he brought to his former ministry. And I met with the representatives of the Maria Holder Trust maybe a year, 18 months ago, sir. And we discussed the plans they were looking at. They explained to me all of the projects they plan to do with respect to nurseries, how they're trying to prioritize, and they had indicated that they would try, based on the need factor, to prioritize Sayers Court. And, you know, you accept these words, sir, with a hope, but you don't pin too much hope on it because the needs are great all around. And there's a song that says, every man thinks his burden is the heaviest, and every man's aim is to achieve the best. And what I may want for my constituency is the same thing that all other 29 people in here, sir, want for their constituencies. So I am very glad that we've now taken the step to allocate the land and to put the land in a position that it can be used and accessed by the Maria Holder Trust to bring to fruition its plans for the persons in Sayers Court, Silver Sands, and the surrounding areas. So why this is also necessary is my constituency has a geographical divide. There's up the hill and there's down the hill. My constituency literally, sir, is half up the hill, like Parish Land, Ferry Valley, and the rest. Half down the hill, Sayers Court, Silver Sands, Hopewell, and whatnot. And it is not just a geographical divide. The two sides don't really mix. Now, but what you have is there's an existing nursery, a very small nursery, currently there, sir, and persons from up Parish Land are trying to get the children into the nursery because you can just walk down the hill and deposit the children. Now, in a strange way, sir, that leads to integration at the lowest level. Is integration at the level of babies who would then form friends and harmonize in the whole constituency. And it is a very hard constituency, sir, to canvass, to make plans, to do things, because if you plan a children's party in Parish Land, the kids from Sayers Court and Silver Sands are not going. If you plan one down the hill, those from up the hill are not going. And it is almost counterintuitive as we move on and we try to form linkages with other countries. We're uniting through Zoom. The world is becoming a smaller place that we can still have those artificial divisions in one voting block. So I'm going to be very glad, sir, to have a nursery being constructed there that can accommodate the needs of most of the constituency. Now, the other thing, sir, I am very impressed. If you actually see the Maria Holder nurseries, from outside, you can see these things were purpose-built. They were purpose-built, futuristically intended to serve the needs of children. And we keep forgetting that a nursery is not just four walls. How you construct that nursery has to bear in mind the eventual users of the nursery. So you can't just say, here's a building, let's cut this up into sleeping area, I don't know, roundabout area, and put 2 swings in the backyard, because you're not stimulating the children. Us as children, sir, when we were, sorry, see, I'm doing it here, I'm lumping myself in with you, sir. You being significantly younger than me, as is immediately apparent. But, sir, when we were children, I remember gathering, waiting for Auntie Olga to come on in radiodiffusion. And the teacher would pull everybody, and you sit down looking at the radiodiffusion like if it was a TV. And you're excited because something is coming on, and you gather together, and you turn it on, and you listen. And that was one segment. That was perhaps the most excitement we had at the St. Giles Nursery School. That was, if I cast my mind back to St. Giles Nursery School, so that was probably the most excitement I ever had. But right now, a parent approached me and asked me for assistance with a tablet for her child. And I've been trying to help parents with tablets for the children. And I asked, how old is your child? And she said, 2. I said, 2? Your child using a tablet at 2? I said, Minister, come and see. She took me to her house and gave her child the phone. The 2-year-old child, sir. The 2-year-old child reached for his mommy's finger and put it on the phone to open the phone. They know how to get to YouTube, sir. They know how to select the children's cartoons and whatnot. There's 2, sir, and 3. For us, that would have been beyond contemplation. So the whole point of this is what served us as nursery schools and what served us as primary schools with relation to the physical built infrastructure and also the curriculum is of no relevance to children who are living and growing up in this time. So nursery schools need to be built specifically for them. A swing and a monkey bars is not enough. They need to have games that stimulate, areas that they can see colors that stimulate. So they also even tell you how to paint the assorted, the sleeping area should be painted in one color because that color brings the children down. The classroom should be painted in another color because that improves stimulation and acumen. these are all of the things that we have to be faced with in trying to design what is right for our children. So I don't envy the Minister of Education. I really don't envy her. She effected, education in Barbados is effectively from cradle to the grave. We're educating children a lot earlier, and people are going into university a lot older. We have a whole cadre of mature students coming out of the university all the time, sir. Every year, somebody older is graduating from university. And the Honorable Minister of Education, sir, is tasked with trying to manage and accommodate all. We as a government, with all that is going on, simply do not have the capacity now to be able to build all that is necessary to develop our children. We cannot, at this point in time, sir, build the nursery schools that are required to start the stimulation of those young minds so that they can realize their fullest potential. We can only do this with the assistance of persons like, of institutions like the Maria Holder Trust. And I also want to urge corporate Barbados, this is give back time, sir. This is give back time. You don't have to give a lot. But as things become more difficult in Barbados, as COVID drags on and the pull on the government's purse is more aimed at health than anything else, because we have to actually forestall the effects of COVID and any other diseases that may affect the people in Barbados, then we now look to those corporate citizens who would have benefited over years for assorted concessions from various graces and gratuities on behalf from successive governments, and ask them, you might not be able to build a whole school, but there's nothing at all wrong with putting a part of your budget towards a charitable endeavor, and education is a most worthwhile charitable endeavor, because right now, at this point, the government is doing the best it can, but those who are going to suffer are those children whose parents are unable to provide them with all of the devices and all of the requirements that they have to push an evolving curriculum and an evolving school agenda. So, sir, I cannot overemphasize the importance of what the Maria Holder Trust is doing. I wish to thank them fully for starting the fast track of the Sears Court Day Nursery. It is long overdue. I'm not saying it's long overdue on their part, but one is needed desperately. And I am here, sir, smiling as I think of the enduring benefit of having a state-of-the-art nursery in Christchurch East, because that, sir, will lead to giving opportunities for children who otherwise might not be able to afford the opportunity at that level. For us to grow as a society, sir, we have to invest in our young people. And that investment now has to come earlier and earlier, because as the world is evolving, children are evolving, and the children of today, sir, require a lot more in terms of stimulation, a lot more in terms of curriculum, a lot more in terms of investment than we did. And I'm glad that some charitable organizations are turning their eyes to the children of Barbados, sir, and investing in our future. So with those few words, I wish to entirely support this resolution.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too want to lend my support for this resolution. I'm mindful that this resolution is long in coming, as are many others relating to the investment of the Maria Holder Trust. The entity, as my learned colleagues have indicated, has been doing invaluable service to this country, particularly in the areas of education and certainly in the area of health. For the past few years, they have made this country their home, and they have treated to the people of this country with tremendous respect. And we, I believe, sir, are eternally grateful to them for the contribution that they have made. I too am proud to be part of a cabinet, sir, that did not come to office and disregard the work that had gone before and the initiative that would have existed between the honorable, former administration, certainly, the former Minister of Education, and certainly the Maria Holder Memorial Trust. Because this project actually started for the construction of the 6 nursery schools, all the way back, sir, I believe in 2016. The genesis of it would have started coming out of the CARICOM Secretariat, where all countries would have been urged in the CARICOM region to facilitate full educational provision for all children between the ages of 3 and 5 by the year 2015. The government of Barbados then, sir, obviously was not in a financial position to do many things, and amongst those things was also being able to build out nursery schools to be able to fulfill this particular objective. And in stepped the Maria Holder Memorial Trust with a certain level of investment to be able to propose to the then government the possibilities of constructing the 6 nursery schools across the island, which had been identified by the Ministry of Education as being those locations where it was densely populated, locations which were in dire need, as my colleagues have indicated, with respect to providing the necessary nursery schools in those particular areas. The intention at the time, sir, I believe, was to build on what had been recommended at the level of the CARICOM Secretariat. And given that Maria Holder had the necessary funds to be able to invest, the intention was that it would have been done over a period of time to be able to first acquire the land, to be able to obviously construct the respective buildings in accordance with the ministry's specification, and then to be able to have a number of our young people being able to enter the respective institutions. There have been frustrations, sir, and I really couldn't stand here and not speak to it, because I do know from meeting with the trust and with some of the other entities who have been doing this type of work in this country, that on many occasions they are frustrated by the level of bureaucracy that exists in being able to allow them to achieve and to accomplish what they would like. I think, sir, it's fair to say that all of us at some point are frustrated with the level of bureaucracy that exists across the government of Barbados, this one and others in the past as well. And I know that we're trying our level best to be able to free up some of the hurdles and the challenges that a number of these entities are confronted with. I know that certainly at the level of the government ministers and certainly the cabinet, there is a commitment to ensure that not only entities like the Maria Holder Trust, but certainly all other entities that are doing this type of work that have really been carrying Barbados for the last couple of years, that all of them are able to be recognized and that the process of idea to actual execution is as seamless as possible so that the work can be accelerated as quickly as possible. The reality is, sir, that we cannot do it alone. I think, everyone knows that we've had significant difficulties with a number of our schools, not just at the nursery level, but in terms of whether it's environmental issues or school closures, as a result of a lack of investment over the last decade, where significant sums would not have been expended on the plant and the plant infrastructure. And as a consequence, it has meant that we are pretty much playing catch up every single year, trying to make good the existing school plant and to keep our students and our teachers in a safe and healthy environment. That too, sir, is not without its challenges, but I think that this type of investment is really what it is that we have to aspire to, because many of our buildings have really not been renovated for the last 30 years. Many of them are soft stone. Some of the nursery schools are within soft stone buildings. Many of them are plagued with their own level of environmental issues. And as a consequence, the welcoming of any newly constructed plants into the landscape of the schools across the island are indeed welcome. With respect to the school at Government Hill, the recommended size for that school is going to be 120. I think others would have alluded to the fact that there's been heavy overcrowding at Charles F. Brooms Primary, and the current enrollment at Government Hill Nursery School is in excess of 100 students. I'm mindful, sir, that this project is nearing completion, and I believe that within the next few months, I believe probably early January, we'll be able to have the intake of the students there. That is one of the projects that has been ongoing by the trust, and we look forward to the completion and the welcoming of those students being able to be settled into better surroundings. With respect to Holders Hill, the size of the capacity for the school is 90. The reality is that there are no pre-primary facilities within close proximity of the proposed Holders Hill facility. The attempts to, and I believe the Honourable Representative for the area would have also spoken to this, again, there's a dire need in the community to be able to have proper facilities for young people, and particularly at the early age. And also, with respect to Sears Court, the recommended size there, sir, is 90, and this is intended to again service the surrounding community, as it is some distance away from the high level of commercial activity. The Lawn Primary School, which surrounds this area in Sears Court, is the St. Christopher Primary School, which is presently under capacity. So, sir, the proposal by the trust to construct these nursery schools is certainly welcome from the Ministry of Education. I think is welcomed by the people of Barbados, and certainly will enrich the lives of our respective communities. I certainly in education have been looking at discussions with the trust as it relates to other types of facilities. We are in dire need of additional primary schools. We're in dire need of additional secondary schools. There are only so many repairs that I can possibly do to old institutions. And you would be mindful, sir, that a few years ago under the last administration, we lost the opportunity to be able to acquire a loan from the CDB for about $64 million, which would have helped us to improve significantly a number of our school plants. I suppose it would be fair to say that we lost that just like we lost other opportunities, not only in education, but certainly across the entire sector of government. As a consequence, on coming to office, we have really been trying our best to be able to acquire new funds. And I know that those in the Ministry of Finance have been working assiduously to try to acquire as much as they can to assist us. And I'm grateful to them for so doing. I am also mindful, sir, that the investment being made by the trust, once we're able to get past this issue of the lease arrangements, certainly being able to start the ball rolling. They've in many cases already prepared the plans for the area. There's, I think, a model that they've been using at a number of the school plants. So it's really a case of replicating on a number of the parcels of land the similar structure, because there's a design that is obviously approved at all levels. And, sir, I would want to take this opportunity to encourage other trusts, other entities, corporate entities across Barbados to get involved in assisting education and assisting us in trying to build out suitable plants that our students and our teachers can feel comfortable in going into the school environment, because it really is a very difficult task to have to manage a process where there has been so much neglect for so many years across the various educational institutions. Notwithstanding, our teachers and our students have also been doing exceptionally well in difficult circumstances, and I think we owe them a debt of gratitude in the way in which they have managed the circumstances, knowing that they have not been easy. But I do feel that we would wish that more persons and more entities would be able to join hands with both the Ministry of Housing and the Ministry of Education, and indeed certainly the Ministry of Health as well, to be able to help the Barbados government to do some of the heavy lifting that is necessary. I know that the Prime Minister has spoken on several occasions too about creating an investment environment where entities not only will apply for concessions to be able to construct these particular properties, but certainly that we recognize a mechanism by which they are able to access things quickly, and that if necessary facilities are put in place for that. And I look forward, sir, to being able to see that come to fruition, so that some of those frustrations that many of them presently have, sir, are put to rest once and for all. So I suspect that will be coming in the near future. But, sir, again, I just want to endorse this resolution and say thank you to the Maria Holder Trust. Also, thank you to the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Maintenance for being able to work quickly, and to the Minister for being able to work quickly to bring these resolutions. I believe there are a few others that are in the works as well. And we have all been given the respective directive to make sure that these are pushed through as quickly as possible, being ever mindful of the importance and the significant investment that is being made by the Maria Holder Trust. With those few words, sir, I'm obliged.
Honourable Member for St. Michael West.
Thank you very much, sir. Just to say that I would want to be associated with any complimentary remarks which are offered on behalf or towards the Maria Holder Trust. I think the work done in Barbados already through their generosity is to be applauded, and it's very much appreciated by the people of Barbados. I would want to suggest to the Honorable Minister of Housing, member for Christchurch West, and perhaps the Honorable Minister of Education, member for St. Michael Southeast, that you perhaps research a little further the origins of the efforts of the Maria Holder Foundation in Barbados with respect to their desire to assist with development of educational facilities and other facilities. You would find that it goes beyond the last administration, and in fact originated with the last Barbados Party administration, the office of the Prime Minister, and I had some particular responsibility for seeking early to facilitate that. But then, of course, we had a change of government in 2008. We lament the long lag in terms of the time which would ensue before projects would actually get going. But we're happy today for what we're seeing materialize and become a reality. There's a nice-looking facility which is going up not too far from properties owned by myself and the Honourable Member for Christchurch West. Of course, with respect to ownership of properties, we're talking about two different leagues when we talk about those two gentlemen. But we applaud the work of the Maria Holder Trust, and we're glad to see these projects coming to fruition. I do have a question as to what are the particulars which are considered when areas are identified for such projects, the extent to which the political directorate gives advice as to where these facilities should be located. We would ever want to know that when entities, charities demonstrate a desire to be generous, that the efforts are not negated or nullified to any extent because of political considerations, political dynamics. I am not here to challenge today because I'm not in a position to, that this facility is not needed in Christchurch East Central or in St. James South or in St. Michael Southeast. I'm not here to challenge that. I don't have information which would suggest to me that they would have been better placed elsewhere and the other place would have commanded a greater priority. I'm simply asking, how is it determined as to what facilities, where, and when? And simply suggesting, in fact, strongly suggesting that we don't have a situation where political considerations become the prime motivator as to where and when these facilities are constructed. I do have a recommendation for my honorable friend from Christchurch West, and that is that there is a property along Country Road. One might say east of or north of Skeet Road, depending on how one looks at these the geographical pointers. There's a vacant lot, used to house a facility for seniors, elderly folks. It's now vacant. And if it is to be considered that others of these facilities are to be constructed, there's a spot there that you may want to give some consideration to. In the interests of the communities of St. Michael West, was still part of the Barbados electoral map and the Barbados geographical space. Mr. Speaker, I am asking on behalf of the people of St. Michael West. In fact, in early conversations with the Maria Holder representatives, we were thinking very, very, very strongly that that could have been one of the locations because of the dynamics operating in that area vis-a-vis the presence of any other such facility and the heavy populated communities that exist around that area. While I'm on that, I would want again to draw, I would want to draw to the attention of this honorable minister, having drawn it to the attention of the former Minister of Housing. The National Housing Corporation had use of a building east of it that for a long time lay unoccupied and unused. I think it is still unoccupied, and I don't know the extent to which it is used for any wholesome or positive purpose. And as the duly elected representative of St. Michael West, I had prevailed upon the then Prime Minister, the late Prime Minister, and leader of the Barbados Party administration at the time, that the communities of Hainesbury Road and Bike Hall and Garden Land and some parts of your constituency, Mr. Speaker, and some parts of the city could have benefited significantly from a training facility being established there, and that building perhaps could have been put to such use. That was at a time when there was much emphasis by the then administration, led by late Prime Minister, on establishing community technology resource centers. And we had asked that one perhaps could be put in that facility. And in fact, the government of the day had, the Prime Minister of the day had acceded to that request. The building now existing there for quite some time, was refurbished. And in fact, there was an extension made to the building to facilitate the computer labs. To date, I do not know that anything has happened. The government was changed in 2008. The extension was left unused. The previously existing part of the building, as far as I know, was left unused, and it remains that way today. And while we are happy to have charities, local and international, do what they can to help us with our developmental facilities, we really ought, as a government, responsible firstly and primarily for our own people, to ensure that all of the existing capacity which we have is put to good and proper use. And to let a building like that just lay there unused and a new extension not at all be used, I don't think is something of which we are to be proud. And before I take my seat, I want to say this because I think it is important to say this. It is all right to have charities such as the Maria Holder Trust, the foundation, help us with these facilities. It is also all right to have other charities help us in other ways. And we're looking to take care of our children when we provide daycare facilities or facilitate others in helping us to provide daycare facilities. But it continues to me to be a matter of sore concern that we have many parents, Mr. Speaker, you see this in St. Michael Central, who cannot feed their children on a daily basis. So while we celebrate the construction at Government Hill, the construction to take place in other places to provide daycare facilities for our children, while we celebrate that, while we compliment generous donors, this government must always realize and should not forget and should pay more attention to the fact that we have parents out there in Barbados today, multiple hundreds of parents, who cannot feed their children. They cannot feed their children. So you will erect a nice facility up the road there, and those who have jobs and those who are fairly well off will lodge their children there and go to their income-generating enterprises. There are many others who cannot feed their children. And I make a plea on their behalf. And they're not only in St. Michael West, they are all over Barbados. I know they're in St. Michael Central, Mr. Speaker. We need to pay, and I hear say Philip North, we need to pay attention to that matter because there are too many parents who cannot feed their children. And something has to be done. More robustly, something must be done to address that situation.
I'm for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First, let me thank all those honorable members who spoke. It made me think of a couple things. First thing, obviously, I have not had a child of nursery school age for quite some time. So therefore, I didn't think of the color stimulation and the colors needed to allow the child to get to sleep faster or to be stimulated faster that the member for Christchurch East noted. And I thank him for that because it carried me back to those wonderful days. My youngest is 22, so that would tell you it's been quite some time since I have had a child of nursery age. But I understand that the member for Christchurch East is now looking to start his. The younger of the two. But I understand the member for Christchurch East is now about to, on that journey, and I applaud his endeavors and his exuberance in looking forward to that journey of having that experience in life. But what I think, and I also appreciate, obviously, the Honourable Minister of Education, who gave a fuller idea of why and where the locations were. And to answer the Liberal opposition, these locations were chosen under the previous administration, actually. In 2012, these locations were chosen, and we have not sought to change or alter them in any way. We are following through on these locations. Now, I would not imagine that the trust would choose locations based on political persuasion. I'm fairly sure that it was based on need and based on densities. And when I look at the locations, I do think that they're highly dense areas that may not have had those kinds of facilities. And I don't think that I would want to suggest that there's any politics involved. I think it's on densities and the needs. And it goes back to the need for a good foundation. And with respect to the building next to the school, next to NHC, that the Honourable Member spoke of, yes, we're looking at it. We're actually looking at that building to be used as a location for actually our building renovations project. And that is what we're hoping to do, small renovations there, and that will be used for our wider building renovations project that we are embarking on. But the wider point and the greater point, Mr. Speaker, that came out from the other presentations from the honourable members, and I take the point. We need jobs in this country. We need jobs badly. I heard the honourable member talk about people that can't feed their children. They can't feed their children because we're in a pandemic and we have a problem and we need to get jobs and we need to get jobs now. And I agree, we need to get jobs now. And this opportunity to build 2 nursery schools, once we provide the land, gives an opportunity to masons, gives an opportunity to carpenters, gives an opportunity to laborers, electricians, plumbers, gardeners, landscapers. All of these things, this would give an opportunity. I'm supporting the honourable member, and he raises.
I remember.
I thank him for his support, but he's misleading the House a bit, Mr. Speaker. It is not true that there are parents in this country who can't feed their children because we're in a pandemic. That situation existed before the arrival of COVID. If the honourable member is saying that started with COVID, well, then he needs to be clear in saying so. But my view is, and I'm sure that there are many in agreement with me, this thing predates COVID.
Continue on, remember for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we need jobs in this country. And we are looking forward and pressing on. We are going to be building houses. We are going to be renovating buildings. Every opportunity that I see to be able to create opportunities for jobs in this country for our artisans. And let me also say, what this also does is it frees up the mother who otherwise would have to stay home to mind the child, to have an opportunity to put the child at the nursery and then go out and get a job for herself as well. So this provides jobs on multiple levels. I am laser focused. I am laser focused to make sure that we get jobs provided in this country. For our artisans, for our young people, for our women folk, everybody who wants a job, who should be able to get that opportunity to get job, to get training, pre-COVID, post-COVID, intra-COVID, whatever it is, we got to get jobs in this country for our people so they can feed themselves and feed the family, and I'm focused at that, and with every bit of my body and my capability and my ability and my intuition and my knowledge and my experience, we are going to get jobs in this country. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this resolution do not pass.
The question is that this resolution do not pass. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Order number 5, sir. In the name of the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, to move the passing of a resolution to extend the public health emergency.
Mr. Speaker, we've now done this particular exercise, I believe, on at least 3 occasions. And we are here in part because it is a constitutional and statutory obligation, but also, Mr. Speaker, because it is the right thing to do. And I speak specifically of the state of emergency that exists in Barbados as having been proclaimed a month ago by Her Excellency under the provisions of the Emergency Management Act. In March of this year, we took a decision to declare a state of emergency and to shut down Barbados. I don't need to recap any of the events that have happened since then. What is clear, though, Mr. Speaker, is that we are not at all out of the woods. When we started to talk about COVID and how it impacted Barbados, strangely enough, the world was still in a very different place. The COVID numbers were low, and we were coming to grips with having 1 and 2 and 3 cases in our country. Globally today, 43 million people have contracted COVID. 29 million have been reported as having recovered, and 1.6 million have died. In March, Mr. Speaker, the numbers were nowhere near so high. Every day we watch CNN, BBC, other international news channels, and these news channels are reporting news in relation to COVID statistics in jurisdictions that we trade with, that we do business with, and perhaps most importantly, jurisdictions, Mr. Speaker, that represent source markets for our tourism sector. And in many respects, we, as far as the steps taken by international bodies and steps taken by countries. In that regard, sir, we are but spectators. But with respect to what happens in Barbados, we are not spectators, Mr. Speaker. We have our own destiny in our hands. I believe a high-ranking U.S. official said only yesterday or the day before that they cannot control the pandemic. What they can control are the therapies and the vaccines and things of that sort. And an individual who I've had cause to read on many occasions, named Jeffrey Sachs, a professor of global development or something like that. Anybody who reads international law and development, and I've read a little bit of it, would have read Jeffrey Sachs. And Jeffrey Sachs describes that giant of a country to the north of us not as having lost the fight against COVID, but as having given up in the fight against COVID, as having surrendered itself to the pandemic, and rightly or wrongly deciding that they're going to focus on the back end. How can we make it better? Those are not options that are available to us, Mr. Speaker. In a population with 300,000 people, we don't get to decide that we want vaccines for Barbados and Barbadians the day the vaccines become available. In fact, we know only too well that because of our size, because we are not a major financial player, that vaccines for us in Barbados and in St. Lucia and in Trinidad, we will get them, I'm sure, but we will get them after everybody has been fed and watered. So we don't get, Mr. Speaker, to say that we are going to surrender to the pandemic. We have to fight tooth and nail every step of the way to make sure that we are not overcome. Now, Mr. Speaker, the last 6 months, 7 months have been a learning experience for us. It has perhaps been the worst of times to have been involved in governance, perhaps the worst of times to have been involved in trying to run a country. But how we have dealt with the COVID pandemic in Barbados, I hope, sir, will represent a case study in years to come as to how small, nimble economies are able to respond to things that cause giants to grind to a halt. And I believe, sir, that it is a case study that will serve to vindicate, Mr. Speaker, the kinds of decisions that have been taken by this administration, both in terms of protecting the livelihoods of our citizens and protecting the lives of our citizens. At no step of the way has the decision-making process been easy. I remember being absolutely petrified at the notion that we, as a country, were about to embark on a curfew. Curfews are things that are imposed in Jamaica, imposed in Trinidad, imposed in other parts of the world, but certainly not in my memory. And we've been hard-pressed to find anybody in living memory who can testify to a state of emergency in Barbados and a curfew. We had no manuals to guide us. We had no case studies, no best practices to tell us how we should approach this and how we should approach that. But what we did have, Mr. Speaker, what we did have and what we treasure most has been our ability to sit with people and to work out how we walk this journey. At the outset, Mr. Speaker, we met with the senior public servants, we met with the parliamentarians, we met, the leader of the opposition was involved in that, we met with the private sector, we met with the workers' unions, and we said, we, Barbados, are facing an issue and the waters ahead will be rough. So let us reason together and see how we can get across. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that we've done a remarkable job. And it would not be a bad time, Mr. Speaker, to thank all of those individuals who have sacrificed, all of those individuals, too, who have suffered but remain patient, all of those individuals who share our optimism for success and a brighter tomorrow, for staying the course with us. But, Mr. Speaker, having determined a month ago that we needed to embark on another 30-day state of emergency, we are at the point where, under the law as a parliament, we are required to make a decision. Because under the provisions of the Constitution, under the provisions of the Emergency Management Act, a state of emergency can only be declared by Her Excellency for a period of 30 days, and thereafter, in order for it to continue its life, it must be by way of resolution of Parliament. And even that, sir, the drafters of our Constitution and the framers of our laws have determined that we should not have an unfettered discretion in relation to how long a state of emergency should last. And they've said that we, as a Parliament, the highest lawmaking body in this country, can at most extend the state of emergency up to 6 months. Up to 6 months. We've already had a 6-month state of emergency, and we are here today, Mr. Speaker, to determine whether it so suits this Parliament that we should agree in this resolution to extend it for a further 5 months. What does that mean? Mr. Speaker, we have a number of COVID directives still in place, and those will continue to be the law. But essentially, Mr. Speaker, it speaks to the fact that the foundation factors that caused us to move to a state of emergency in this country have not yet been removed. Now, you know, Barbadians have in some ways gone back to their ways of life. The fetting has started back. The social events have started back. Regrettably, the workforce has not been able to get back to where it needed to be, and tourism certainly has not. But, you know, places that were closed during the early days of COVID have reopened to business. It is remarkable that just 6 short months ago, there were long lines outside of our supermarkets. And people were fearing shortages of toilet paper. People were fearing shortages of food. None of which came to pass. None of which came to pass. But that was the early panic. But perhaps it's human nature, Mr. Speaker, that when once the turmoil has settled a bit, when once the panic has dissipated, we feel things are all right now. It is this duty, Mr. Speaker, as a Parliament, to remind our citizens that things are not yet all right. It will take a long time before things are all right. But as a government and as a Parliament, we have an obligation, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the structures that are needed to be in place to get Barbados safely over this chasm are in place. It is our constitutional responsibility to reflect, Mr. Speaker, on what has happened over the last 6-7 months and to consider whether it is appropriate for us to maintain the state of emergency for a further 5 months to take us to the 6th. And at the end of that period, Mr. Speaker, as a Parliament, we may well have to come back here and seek, well, the first step would be a proclamation, but then we would then have to come back and seek to extend that too. But, Mr. Speaker, one thing is sure, and all of the commentators are saying, and if you watch CNN this morning or BBC this morning, sir, you would realize the kind of COVID spikes that are being seen all across the globe. And it would be a wonderful thing if Barbados could be in a proverbial bubble, but that is not the case. So our duty as a government, Mr. Speaker, as I wind up this brief entreaty, is to say to Barbadians that as comfortable as you may feel you are in respect of COVID, we cannot drop our guard. And Mr. Speaker, this morning, in the message from Her Excellency, there was a proclamation made by her that the Parliament of Barbados would, with effect from the day, be able to meet part physically and part virtually. It is not a mandatory requirement. It is, in fact, permissive. It is not a direction from Her Excellency. We, as a parliament, have the responsibility to determine the mechanics. What will it look like? But we have to be responsible leaders. Our last 3 cabinet meetings, Mr. Speaker, took place virtually. I don't know if everyone has been following the news across the region, but almost all of the cabinet of the Bahamas had to go into quarantine just 2 weeks ago. Almost all. Now, the Minister of Health and his fine officers, the fine officers at the airport, the systems that we've put in place with the protocols, have been serving us well as our gatekeepers. They've been serving us well as our gatekeepers, Mr. Speaker, but there's always the possibility that someone may slip through. We had a recent event involving a lady who was not in quarantine. People are behaving as though she was in quarantine and left quarantine. She was not in quarantine. But as it turned out, she proved positive. She proved to be positive for the virus in her second test. But we followed every single protocol that was required. And our protocols were not arrived at whimsically. But it happened, Mr. Speaker. And there are reports we see periodically where people have tested negative, and then weeks later, for some bizarre reason, they turn to be positive. We cannot behave as though we know everything about COVID, though we probably know a hell of a lot more about it than we have most other diseases. So if the Cabinet of Barbados can say to itself, brothers and sisters, we have to take precautions. And where possible, let us meet virtually so that, should something happen, the functioning of the country can continue. I can see no harm, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I see every good, with the Parliament of Barbados taking a similar stance. In England, Mr. Speaker, anybody who watches the debates of the House of Commons, the chamber of the House of Commons used to be full. In fact, in our chamber, we each sit in separate chairs. But they sit on benches. Should I take my seat? They sit on benches, crushed together. And if you look at the House of Commons now, you see a seat here, then about 3 yards down the road, another person. A chamber that accommodates hundreds of people probably has at most 20 or 30 people in it at any given time. So it is an important exercise in judgment, and that is why we are in this chamber. I'm going to finish now. So that's why we're in this chamber, because the people of this country have elected us as representatives, in part based on the reliance on our judgment. And I hope that the leader of the opposition, will recognize the important precaution by enabling Parliament to sit part physically and part virtually. The rules of engagement are now to be determined, and I believe that the clerk will very shortly have a proposal for him as to how we can participate in parliamentary activity, but it is an important precaution to take, ensuring at all times, Mr. Speaker, that the voice of a democratic parliament is as loud as it ever was. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask this chamber to support this resolution to extend the state of emergency as proclaimed by Her Excellency until the 27th day of March, 2021. It will be at the end of the financial year, and around that time, Mr. Speaker, that's when we have the estimates debate, and even that, we will have to consider how will that work? What will the well of Parliament be like? We have to consider all these things, but nothing that we do is written in stone, and nothing that we have abided by over history, over long practice as a legislature, must be considered as so binding on us that we are unable to take prudent measures to safeguard not just ourselves, but the country that we have been chosen to lead. Mr. Speaker, I ask that members give this extension of the state of emergency their fullest support. We are not doing it for ourselves. We are doing it for the country that we've been chosen to lead. I'm obliged to you.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
I beg to move that this resolution do not pass.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, sir. We have heard and clearly saw the voice of the Honourable Member for St. Joseph, Honourable Attorney General, on the matter of the extension of the state of emergency in Barbados. And I would want to simply say, as a start to make this brief submission, that it is one thing to suggest we're still faced with a COVID situation which threatens our well-being in several ways. And therefore, as a country, we need to be guarded. Part of that guard is that we live life and allow our institutions to function in conditions governed or influenced by a state of emergency. And the question is that it be extended for 5 months until the end of March, or 6 months, however long that is. And the case can be made for an extension. I would have wished the Honorable Attorney General would have suggested to us in a stronger fashion why 6 months, because though the legislation allows you to extend for 6 months, does not say you have to go 6 months. And I am sure that 3 months from now, God willing, this Parliament will still be meeting. I hope this Parliament will still be meeting 3 months from now. Why aren't we extending this for 3 months? We have had extensions for 1 month. Why are we going so far as to go 6 months down the road? And I don't know that we have heard that. One might suggest that we anticipate that the conditions which now exist will be existing 6 months from now. Well, fine. But if that's the case, 3 months from now, we can come back and extend for a further 3 months, or 2, or 1. Simply saying, I would have wished you would have spoken more clearly to that aspect of the matter, because I am a little bit worried as to why 6 months at this stage. Now, the Honourable Member for St. Joseph referred to the fact that we have seemingly forgotten that we are under COVID threat. And so we see fetting ongoing and social events ongoing as dynamic of complacency seemingly sets in. And made a case as to why Parliament should be meeting virtually. Attested that Cabinet in the last 3 sittings has met virtually. Now, I am very concerned about the mixed signals sent by those who speak with authority from the government side on these issues. I have always said on my feet in here and elsewhere, listen carefully to the voice of the government. We have to assume that they are taking the best advice from the health professionals, and therefore listen to the government and follow the protocols. I persist in saying that. But I'm concerned about mixed signals, because when you stand in here and tell me we have to extend this state of emergency for 6 months, the world is being visited by a second wave, and we're still faced with a threat. We are allowing flights to come from these second wave places of origin, and every day bringing new cases to Barbados. You are saying that, and it seems to me mixed signals are coming from the voice of the government. Now, fetting is ongoing, and social events have been amped up. We're concerned about that. Cabinet, therefore, will be meeting virtually. Parliament would like to meet virtually. I've been seeing images of last weekend, Mr. Speaker, with some of the same voices in here. The embodiment of those voices were principles in hugging and fetting and celebrating without any thought for physical distancing. You have seen that, Mr. Speaker. I have not seen your image in any of those that I have seen, but I've seen the images of others. You can't stand and tell Barbados, we have to keep our guard up. We must extend the state of emergency for 6 months, not 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, but 6. Can't stand and tell Barbados you're getting complacent because you're fetting again, and your social events represent situations where physical distancing is not being observed. But those who are our political leaders and the principal voices of government, hugging, congregating. Churches can only do that if they observe. Churches can only do that if they observe the physical protocols. You can't lay a hand on a fellow to pray for a fellow. You can pray for him from the distance. You can't lay a hand on a woman to pray for her. You do that from the distance. You can't lay a hand on a child to dedicate that child or baptize that child, whatever terms you would prefer to use, because physical distancing protocols are in place. Yes, Mr. Speaker, all these things are in place, and wisely so, and necessarily so. But you come to the Parliament of Barbados and you say to us, you know what? We have to watch it in Parliament. Some of us are not well, so we have to meet virtually. And as a cabinet, we have to be responsible, so we meet virtually. And we're going to extend this for 6 months because we have to keep our guard up. What do you do otherwise? Now, that is what is playing out right before our very eyes. And if I'm wrong, those on the other side can tell me I'm wrong. I saw it reported. Commissioner of Police stated that violent crime in Barbados is on the rise. The force is concerned about that. Gun-related crime in particular. And he associated that with the conditions of social fallout from COVID. The Honourable Member for Joseph is the Honourable Attorney General as well. And he spoke for a while and ranged far and wide on issues relative to COVID. I didn't hear any concern expressed on his part or any response to the concern expressed by the Commissioner as to what is happening, re the phenomenon of crime in Barbados in relation to the impact of COVID. That concerns me. that concerns others. I simply voice it here to ensure that we do remember that while we guard ourselves in here against exposure to COVID, while we guard ourselves at the level of cabinet against exposure to COVID, while we extend the state of emergency for 6 months, while we tell Barbadians stop being complacent, I simply add to the mix. We've got to remember as a government, there are matters that we need to treat too as well, which are urgent and critical. And what the Commissioner of Police is raising as a concern, the way it is expressed as reported in the press, is contrary to what government has been trying to say to Barbadians, that they've got a handle on crime, and the statistics show a decline in the numbers. I do not know that any Barbadian believes that when it comes to gun-related crime and violent crime. We've got shooting in the middle of town in the middle of the day. We've got shooting just outside churches, disturbing services. We've got shootings 1 minute walk away from police stations. We've got shootings every day and every night. Every day and every night. The Commissioner is saying some of this is related to the COVID situation. The government needs to address that and address it honestly.
Honorable City Bridgetown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give my fullest support to the extension of the emergency act, or state of emergency. And I do so recognizing, of course, exactly what is still confronting us as a country. I would forgive those persons who may feel that we are not in a public health emergency given the nature of things here in Barbados, but I want to give or to emphasize the fact that the public health emergency called COVID-19 still remains a clear and very present danger. As we speak, the public health emergency is seen all over the world, and indeed in all of the source countries that we do business with, they are now experiencing spikes in COVID positive cases. In fact, I can say to you, Mr. Speaker, that all of our countries, in terms of tourism, where our source markets are actually now considered as high-risk countries. And that in Europe and in North America, the rate of COVID cases being experienced at this point in time in several countries is worse than during the so-called first wave. So we have the international situation, and even within this region, we have 7 CARICOM countries, 7 CARICOM members of CARICOM states that are included in the high-risk category, ranging from just over 3,000 cases to as high as just over 9,000 cases. So we are in a situation where this thing remains a clear and present danger. The reason why people in Barbados may not feel that way is because we have been able to enjoy a relatively normal standard of living here in Barbados. And that has to do with the protocols that we have in place. It has to do with the work of the technical people in the various ministries that are working in terms of the COVID response. It has to do with the discipline and the level of cooperation and support from the majority of Barbadians. And it has to do with this emergency act, this emergency legislation, because this is the element of the plan that gives teeth to everything else that we do. And in terms of the time frame for this extension, we must recognize that with the winter tourist season upon us, with the significant increase of flights to this country, and that has already started, that we can anticipate that we will continue to have cases going into the early part of the year. But I will say that there are cases that we can deal with, and I will come to that. But the Emergency Act has to do with other things as well. The act, the legislation is what allows us to be able to have annexes to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, like we did with Blackman Gullah, like we have now with Harrison Point, and with all the other facilities that we have at our disposal, facilities that we have not even used up to this point in time, knock on wood, because we have plan A, B, C, D, down to Z. We were worst case in this situation, and so we were planning, obviously, for the worst. The Emergency Act also is what facilitates the presence of the Cuban nurses here in Barbados. That is what it is. And those nurses have been working. Fortunately for us, we have not had to deploy them in the way anticipated at Harrison Point because of our particular situation. But we have started to deploy some of those nurses to the airport and other facilities to enhance our testing capacity, so that we are now using some of those nurses to be able to swab, take samples from persons because of the increased numbers. The Emergency Act also allows us to have designated quarantine facilities, and also provides us with the opportunity, the last resort, as far as I'm concerned, to be able to deal with people who breach the Quarantine Act, or with designated facilities that do not follow protocols. So that it is a very, very significant piece of legislation, and we cannot continue to do what we're doing without that legislation. So it is against that I'm saying that I give this my fullest support. But where are we? I want to say one thing up front. I heard the Honorable Leader of the Opposition just now, he spoke to the fact that we still have flights, or allowing flights in from countries that are having cases, from high-risk countries. And I want to say this and make this very, very clear. We have a situation here that is a very challenging situation. It's a very complex situation. And so we have to manage the complexity of the situation in ways that would allow us to be able to take the best care that we possibly can of the persons who reside in this country, our countrymen and women, visitors and residents here in Barbados. And the fact is this: we depend on the international trade, and we depend on tourism to generate revenues. The very health sector that I have the honor to lead depends heavily on revenues generated from tourism. The Queen Elizabeth Hospital, which requires the contributions from the health services levy to be able to do the day-to-day operations of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, obviously with tens of thousands of Barbadians being made unemployed, or who became unemployable or unemployed as a result of the shutdown, the lockdown, that significantly impacted on the Treasury. And so the anticipated revenue was simply not there. And there are other things to this as well. If you lock down, we have utility companies in this country that depend on persons, technicians, maintenance people from overseas to come to be able to do maintenance work here. Even the very lab that has done over 33,000 tests, they depend sometimes on people to come in, to fix equipment, refurbish equipment, and in some cases even install and validate new testing equipment. So that the notion of not allowing flights in is one that in itself can result in consequences that are worse than the public health emergency itself. And I am saying that to Barbadians, that what we have here is a situation that, yes, we have about 233 or so cases, having done about 33,000 tests. And our strategy is to test and test and test, and we've been testing per capita more than most. The cases that we have are cases that we are more than capable of managing. When we had the Blackman Gollop facility before the completion of Harrison Point, that facility was never overwhelmed. In other words, we never used half the capacity of that particular institution to do what we had to do because there was no need. Harrison Point at the moment, I believe, we probably have between 10 and 15, I'm not too sure of the figure right now, but it's no more than that, of persons in Harrison Point, which is a 220 bed facility. We purchased almost 100 ventilators, of which we've only had to use 5 so far, thank God. Right? We also have other facilities. If we were in a situation that required us to do otherwise, there are other schools that we would have utilized. There are other facilities that we would have been utilizing in terms of quarantine and so on. We have not had to go there. And I am saying that we have the capacity to manage what we are managing at the moment. And I want for Barbadians and the Chamber to understand that in the initial stages of COVID, we had a family cluster, and we dealt with that. We had the situation with the NAB, another challenge, and we dealt with that. We had the situation with the church, a challenge, and we dealt with that. And recently we had the situation involving the 2 students from the school, and we dealt with that. We tested over 500 and something persons, we contained it, we dealt with it. And I'm saying that to say that I as Minister of Health and Wellness, I'm asking Barbadians to have confidence in the team of Bajans that are here doing what we are doing, because it's a very competent team. And they have more resources at the moment than are necessary for what we are doing right now. And then we have another thing. We are able to determine before we ever get overwhelmed when we need to put the foot down on the gas. We do, on the pedal, on the brakes. We do, so that the situation is not going to arise when we reach a state where we cannot control this thing. No, we're not going to allow that. And the reality is, we have more control and more capacity to deal with positive cases in Barbados at this point in time than we would have economically to deal with tens of thousands of Barbadians who are unemployed, and even with the best will of generous benefactors and all of the charitable organizations. That is unsustainable. So that we have to deal with what we have in terms of positive cases. Now, what is it that we are facing? We have protocols, and we have some protocols that other countries don't have. Especially, I will tell you, that second test. And we are capturing persons at source. Those coming from high-risk countries, they have to go into quarantine, and then there's a mandatory second test. And I want to say that of those persons, since the resumption of flights into this country that have tested positive on second test, I'm telling you now that we are dealing with about 50 odd persons who have tested positive from second tests. We've had about 129 persons testing positive since the resumption of commercial flights on the 12th of July. Between the 12th of July and the 25th of October, 129 persons. Of those 129, there were 47 Barbadians returning. We, of course, had the 13 Ghanaians, 20 from other CARICOM countries, and 49 from other countries. So our major source of positive cases at the moment, 42 from the UK, 35 USA, 17 CARICOM. And what we are seeing is that since flights started to ramp up, yes, we've had an increase in second cases. In September, for example, the number of second cases really was about 29% of the total cases for the month. By October, that jumped to 78% of the total cases, about 39 or so out of 46. And we've been monitoring this situation very, very carefully. And I would say up to this point in time, we have the situation under control. But this could change overnight by one drop of the ball. It can. And that's why we have to be vigilant. And that's why we need the legislation and the extension of the emergency powers, because we still have a few places where people are not doing as they're supposed to do. And it's a constant thing on our part, a constant effort to be able to deal with that particular situation. But I also want to say that even though we've had an increase in the number of flights and obviously the number of visitors arriving on island, what we also have is a far greater capacity to respond than we did 6 months ago. And that's a reality. And that's thanks, I must say, to the Ministry of Finance, the Prime Minister and the team for putting those resources at the disposal of the Ministry of Health and Wellness to be able to effect a proper response given the magnitude of the situation and also the dynamics involved with managing the COVID situation. And what am I speaking about in terms of capacity? We've doubled the staff at the lab to be able to do testing. And another 6 or 7 persons have been certified to be able to, as lab technicians, to work in the lab working with COVID. We've increased the numbers at the airport and the other testing centers to be able to do more swabbing. We've also made it possible for 4 polyclinics out of hours, after normal polyclinic hours and on weekends, to become available for testing, and especially for the second test. And we also are making it possible shortly to be able to have a testing facility at Harrison Point, and also one at the Best Dos Santos lab in the car park to be able to conduct the second test. We've increased significantly the number of testing kits that are required. We've also increased the number of, we've introduced couriers. We're using 3 couriers to be able to collect samples at various time slots from throughout the country to ensure that the lab can transition to a 24-hour service, because previously most of the samples, if not all, were arriving in the evening. And because of the increased numbers, there was a need for the lab to be able to start conducting tests from morning. And so we've been able to transition to that by providing more personnel. We've also been able to deploy our community health liaison officers. They are playing a significant role in this effort, and they have to credit them here for the work that they're doing. They're really doing a very good job. And especially as the hospitality sector opens up, they are certainly required to do what they have to do, especially in relation to the COVID monitoring unit. So those are some of the things that have happened so far in relation to the management of COVID. And we've also, as people would have heard from time to time, we've increased the number of hotels that are designated as quarantine hotels, because obviously if most of the persons entering the country are coming from high-risk countries, then that required additional quarantine facilities to be able to cope with those numbers. And I'm happy to report that that is going very well. We've had 1 or 2 issues, and I've spoken to those in relation to 1 or 2 of the quarantine centers, and we are trying to deal with that particular situation. So far, I've met with the hoteliers and others, and we've had some discussions, and I think that we are seeing some improvement for the most part, although we still have 1 or 2 areas that we need to keep an eye on. But one of the most significant things, and even the emergency powers to some extent also apply to this, is that in the coming weeks, we are going to be utilizing a digital platform to be able to really manage COVID. And this is something that has been in the works now for a few months. There's some integration work going on in terms of various systems, and I am happy to report that in the very, very near future, that we will be rolling out those apps. And what I'm speaking about, the first app, mobile app one, is something called BIMSafe, and that is the information gateway, the travel gateway, for inputting information, online forms, even the test results and so forth from persons coming in, health monitor and systems tracker. That is well on the way. The other one, BIMSafe Tracer, that is an anonymous contact tracer that will significantly enhance our capacity to be able to do contact tracing in this country. The third one, and very, very important one, is the BIMSafe Band. That's for geofencing, health monitor and symptoms, and that is a water-resistant, tamper-proof wristband, and we've ordered about 150,000 of those, because when we put that on you, if you're in quarantine, we will be able to monitor your movement. If you are restricted to a room in a hotel and you move out, we will know. If you try to take it off, we will know. And that gives a level of protection to this country that I think will make every single Barbadian feel safer than they do now. So that when I say to you that we continue to increase the capacity that we have to deal with this particular situation, I mean every word that I say. And so the legislation and the extension of the legislation will take us very close to the end of the winter season. And predictions are that it is probably going to get worse in those countries, because it is now, it is already skyrocketing in several countries, and we have to be able to deal with that. We have to be able to cope with what is coming. We're doing well. We can do better, and we seek to do that, to improve each and every single day. Sometimes we get comments or criticisms coming from the general public. Some of them are useful, and we do take heed and try to improve what it is that we are doing. But at the end of the day, the ability of the chief medical officer, who is empowered to do so, to be able to deal with people who breach protocols or who breach quarantine in this country, that is a significant component of the COVID-19 response. And the fact that we are still designating places for quarantine and so on, that is something also that this extension will also cover. And my final point on this this time has to do with the fact that we've been able to keep the COVID out of most of our healthcare institutions. In fact, all of our healthcare institutions thus far. And the good thing about it is that was not done through any legislation. That was achieved because Barbadians complied with the protocols. And I congratulate the people of this country for so doing. We've gone through many peaks and valleys. It's not been easy, but we are where we are, and we would like to be able to continue on the present path, even get better. But the reality is that we cannot stop what is happening globally, internationally, regionally. But we have it within us to control, to contain, and to make Barbados safe for everyone who visits and everyone in particular who live here. And that is the pledge from the minister, the pledge from the ministry. And I sincerely thank the Attorney General for bringing the extension to this chamber. And I can give the assurance that as long as the public health pandemic or emergency continues, there will be a need for such legislation. And if it has to be extended beyond that, because COVID may still be around, then so be it. The thought of a vaccine, that is something that everyone is talking about these days. We are also monitoring that. We are part of a consortium of countries also with PAHO and looking for vaccine. We've made down payments on vaccines so that at least we can get initially 20% of the population and then move up to 40% and then whatever else is available so that whenever vaccine comes on board, that Barbados and the rest of the Caribbean working through PAHO, the PAHO revolving fund, that we will be able to obtain vaccines to at least vaccinate a certain percentage of the population. And that will help us whenever that comes. And I'm really, really glad for that because as a small island developing state, we are at the bottom of the food chain when it comes to these things. But this particular intervention makes it possible for small countries to be able to access vaccines whenever they are available. And so, with those few words, I hope that people understand the reason, the rationale for the extension of the Emergency Powers Act, because it's still a public health emergency, and we are still very, very, very vulnerable to what is happening around us. But we build up capacity, we built up experience and knowledge. That's why we were able to move from a 14-day quarantine period to 7 days and to where we have it now, because our situation suggested to us that the incubation period of between 2 to 5 days, that's when we are catching these second test positive cases. And we will continue with that, but we still continue to monitor other persons. We are here in this world. We can't live alone. We can't do it alone. We depend on economic activity for the survival of the entire country, for the healthcare system itself. But in return, we who are responsible for managing the pandemic from a public health perspective, we pledge our all to this effort. And I do commend the Honorable Attorney General for bringing the extension to this chamber. I'm obliged.
Honorable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, let me, on behalf of the entire chamber, and in fact, on behalf of the entire Barbados, thank the Minister of Minister of Health and his team for the vast amount of work over the last few months and also for their dedication. You know, Mr. Speaker, it is not known by the country, and I will not say, it is not known that today is the birthday of the Minister of Health. And I hope that it does not become known. But if it should become known, one would have to consider that on a day such as today, the minister is standing here carrying out his solemn responsibility as a minister of government, as a minister of health, to try and make sure that Barbadians are safe. And he has not done it alone, and he's the first person, he's so modest, he's the first person to acknowledge that he hasn't done it alone, that he's had to stand on the shoulders of all the people in the Ministry of Health and elsewhere who have helped to bring us safely thus far. With those words, sir, I thank the Chamber for their support, and I've already asked that this resolution do not pass, but I do so again in the certain hope, sir, that this Chamber will stand united. All of the Chamber, including the Leader of the Opposition, will stand united with the government as we fight for the greater good of Barbadians in the face of this pandemic. I'm obliged to you.
Questions that this resolution do not pass. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 2 p.m.
The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 2 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 2 p.m.